A one-bedroom flat on Wykebeck Valley Road in Gipton looks like nothing from the outside. Brown brick, a small front door, net curtains in the upstairs window. The kind of address you would walk past 1,000 times without thinking about. In 2016, that flat was the centre of a 24-hour crack cocaine and heroin line running across Leeds. The man running it was 20 years old. He stood directly in front of the door, in broad daylight, holding a wad of £20 notes, smoking cannabis, and rapping a song called Designers into a camera. He posted the video. He used his stage name. He flashed a hand signal that announced exactly which gang he belonged to. Months later, armed officers were inside the flat with bun cases full of Class A wraps spread across the kitchen. Today we are covering the West Yorkshire drug operation that advertised itself out of existence, twice, on camera, on Snapchat, and into a 7-year prison sentence. Section 1. Wykebeck Valley Road and the rap video that filmed a drug factory. Wykebeck Valley Road runs through Gipton in East Leeds. It is a residential street, 2-storey houses, low front walls, a sloping pavement, the standard layout of an inner-city Yorkshire estate. Number 137 is a one-bedroom flat sitting in a row of similar properties. There is nothing remarkable about it. The front door is the kind you see in tens of thousands of West Yorkshire homes. In 2016, that one-bedroom flat was the operational base of one of the most active Class A drug supply lines in Leeds. The line went by the name Rico. It ran around the clock. People dialed the number, placed an order, and waited for delivery. The product was crack cocaine and heroin, packaged into individual wraps, stored inside paper bun cases, the kind you would use to bake fairy cakes for a child's birthday party. The man at the centre of the operation was 20 years old at the time. His name was Leeds Manaka. He lived on Francis Street in Chapeltown. His real name was on a tenancy somewhere. His real face was in the West Yorkshire Police database. None of that mattered to him in 2016, because in 2016 he had a different name and a different face. He had a stage name, Levs Montana. He was an aspiring drill rapper, and the music video for his song Designers was filmed directly outside the front door of 137 Wykebeck Valley Road. The same flat where the bun cases sat on the kitchen counter. The same flat where the food blender on the worktop had been used to mix and cut the product. The same flat where, when armed officers eventually walked through the door, they found heroin and crack cocaine ready to go out to customers across the city. You can step back and look at the geography of it. Gipton sits to the east of Leeds city centre. Chapeltown sits to the north. Hare Hills sits between them. Across those 3 districts in the mid-2000s, a network of organised crime gangs were operating dozens of dedicated phone lines, selling Class A drugs to users across Leeds. Police later identified somewhere in the region of 20 to 30 active dealer lines in that part of the city alone. The gangs went by names. One of them was the Flock. The Flock was based around the Chapeltown area. Its members had a habit, unusual even by the standards of organised crime, of openly advertising their involvement in Class A drugs and firearms. Other Leeds gangs operated in the shadows. The Flock did the opposite. The Flock wanted to be seen. Leeds Manaka was a Flock member. At the start of the Designer's music video, he raises his right hand and makes a distinctive F shape with his fingers. That signal is the Flock signal. It announces on camera, in a published music video, his loyalty to a Leeds-based organised crime group. The same gang that, by 2017, would be at the centre of a series of court cases involving drug supply, firearms offences, attempted murder, and turf war stabbings across North Leeds. The same gang that detectives later said had a stranglehold on parts of Chapeltown, with deadly rivalries spilling into shootings on Roundhay Road in rush hour traffic. The Flock branding was the whole point of the F signal at the start of the video. The Designer's video itself is the strange genius of the whole thing. It was not filmed in a studio. It was not filmed against a green screen. It was filmed on the street, outside the actual operational flat, with the front door of the drug factory in shot. Manaka stands in front of the property. He smokes what appears to be cannabis. He pulls out a wad of £20 notes and waves them at the camera. He raps lyrics that boast about drugs and cash. The chorus is about designer goods. The location is the address where the heroin and crack cocaine were being weighed and packaged at the same time the camera was rolling. If you wanted to design a piece of evidence that placed a suspect at the scene of a Class A drugs conspiracy, you could not have done it better than the suspect did himself. The video became the prosecution exhibit. The Rico line, the name customers used, ran on a simple principle. A user dialed the number was answered, an order was placed. A runner brought the product. The runner came back with the cash. The product was prepared in the flat using equipment that, in any other house in the country, would have been completely unremarkable. A food blender, an ice cream scoop, a mixing bowl, a pair of latex gloves. The kind of items you would find in any kitchen drawer. In this kitchen, they were all contaminated with traces of Class A drugs. The investigation later established that the line was operating around the clock, every day of the week, for months on end before officers moved. Manaka sent a marketing message to his customer list around the time the line was at full strength. The message read, in his own words, that Rico was back and that he would be on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That message was later recovered from the mobile phone seized at the scene of his arrest. It is the kind of detail that, on its own, tells you everything about the operation. A round-the-clock dealer line, a marketing message to a customer list, a stage name being used as a brand for the line itself. Rico was the line. Levs Montana was the artist. Levit Manaka was the man behind both. 3 names, 1 operator, 1 20-year-old running everything. 2 specific items will sit at the centre of the next section. The first is a paper bun case. The second is a sentence Manaka used in a customer message that has now been read out in 2 separate Crown Court hearings, 4 years apart. Section 2. The mechanics of the Rico line and the Flock brand. A paper bun case is a soft, fluted, single-use item designed to hold a fairy cake while it bakes in the oven. You buy them in packs of 40 or 60 in any UK supermarket. They cost a couple of pounds. Inside 137 Wykebeck Valley Road, in 2016, those bun cases were holding wraps of crack cocaine and heroin, ready to be handed over to runners who would deliver them across Leeds. Officers walking through the kitchen during the raid found bun cases on the work surface, on the table, and stacked next to the food blender. Each one held individually packaged Class A product. The bun case detail is the kind of thing that, once you know it, you cannot stop thinking about. It is a domestic object doing industrial-scale work. The food blender was used to mix and cut the cocaine. The ice cream scoop was used to portion product. The mixing bowl held quantities while they were being divided into wraps. The latex gloves kept the operator's prints off the merchandise. All of these items, when forensically examined, came back contaminated with traces of cocaine and heroin. The kitchen at 137 Wykebeck Valley Road was, in the language used in court, a drug dealer kit. It was not a hidden laboratory. It was a 1-bedroom flat where the equipment for running a Class A operation sat on the kitchen counters next to whatever the legitimate tenant kept in the same drawers. The contrast is part of why the case stuck in the memory of the officers who worked it. The structure of the operation, as it was eventually presented at Leeds Crown Court, had 3 layers. At the top sat Manaka. He controlled the Rico phone, he directed the runners, he handled the customer base, he sent the marketing messages. He was, in the words of Judge Tom Bayliss QC, a highly sophisticated drugs trafficker with a large supply network. He was 20 years old at the time of his arrest. He had a stage name, a music video, and a Snapchat habit. He also had a 24-hour dealer line turning over Class A product across Leeds. The judge was not exaggerating when he used the word sophisticated. Below Manaka sat his second. The man named in court was Laby. Laby was sentenced for his role at the same hearing. His function was operational. He moved product, managed runners, and ran the line when Manaka was not directly handling it. Labby took 3 years and 9 months at the same Leeds Crown Court hearing, where Manica was sentenced to 6 years. The two men had operated as a unit. The split between them was the standard split of any small operation, with one man holding the brand and the other man holding the day-to-day mechanics. Below Labby sat the foot soldier. He was a 16-year-old boy who cannot be named for legal reasons. The youth was arrested with Manica as the two of them left 137 Wykebeck Valley Road in a taxi. The youth had a fearsome machete hidden down his trousers. He pleaded guilty to conspiracy to supply heroin and crack cocaine and to possession of an offensive weapon. He was given a 42-month sentence. He was 16 years old. He was the bottom of the chain. The blade in his trousers was protection for the line. He was the layer that took the immediate physical risk, while the men above him stayed clean. Step back from the individuals and look at the wider Leeds picture. By 2016, detectives running a major operation called Operation Azure Way had identified somewhere between 20 and 30 dedicated dealer lines operating across Chapeltown and Hare Hills alone. Lines went by names like Paranoid Pete and YSL. Each line had its own brand, its own customer list, its own runners, and its own boss. The Rico line was one of them. The Flock gang sat behind several of them. By the time Operation Azure Way concluded, the team had been granted 300 search warrants and arrested 125 people for drugs and firearms offences. The Flock was at the centre of much of that activity. Detective Inspector Phil Jackson, who headed up Leeds District CID's Serious Organised Crime Unit, said the gang had a stranglehold on its community that had spread into firearms discharges, assaults, and eventually murder. The Flock approach to organised crime was, by the standards of most criminal networks, openly self-promoting. Most drug gangs hide their affiliation. They use plain phones, plain cars, plain clothes. They keep their faces off social media. The Flock did the opposite. Members posed in gang colours. Members threw the F sign. Members appeared in music videos performed at the actual addresses where they were running their lines. There is a phrase that comes up in court reporting more than once, that Flock members openly advertise their involvement in the Class A drugs trade and the use of firearms. That phrase is not a description of an unusual member. It is a description of the gang's whole operating philosophy. The designer's video is the cleanest case study of that philosophy. It is not a recording made in private. It is a published music video uploaded to a public platform, performed at the front door of an active drug supply address by a man who used the same stage name to brand both his music and his dealer line. Rico was Levs Montana. Levs Montana was Levit Manica. Levit Manica was the operator of a Class A line being run out of the flat directly behind him in the shot. The song was called Designers. The lyrics were about drugs and cash. The address was 137 Wykebeck Valley Road. Every piece of that sentence was visible on camera. Investigators did not need to do anything clever to connect the music video to the drug operation. Manica had done that work himself. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next section steps inside the designer's video itself. The cannabis smoke, the wad of £20 notes, the F sign at the start of the track, and the strange contradiction at the heart of the whole performance. Section 3. Drill, cash, and the designer's video. The designer's video opens with a hand. Not a face. Not a wide shot. A hand. Levit Manica raises his right hand in front of the camera and forms his fingers into the shape of an F. The F is the Flock signal. It is the visual equivalent of a logo on the front of a brand's headquarters. It tells anyone watching the video, before the first lyric is even heard, exactly which Leeds organised crime group this performance is connected to. The signal sits there on screen for a few seconds before the camera pulls back. The music starts. The performer is revealed. The performer is Manica, in front of 137 Wykebeck Valley Road, smoking what appears to be cannabis in broad daylight, on a residential street in East Leeds. The stage name across the screen is Lev's Montana. The stage name is Borrowed Energy. Montana is a reference to Tony Montana, the fictional drug dealer at the centre of the 1983 film Scarface. The borrowing is not original. Drill artists across the United Kingdom have been using Scarface references for years. The reference is shorthand for ambition, excess, and a certain cinematic version of organised crime. The reference, in the context of this particular video, sits next to the actual front door of an actual Class A drug supply operation. The fictional reference and the operational reality occupy the same frame. The chorus of the song is about designer goods. Manaka raps about labels, watches, and the visible markers of money. The lyrics are not subtle, they are not coded, they do not hide behind metaphor. The lyrics describe a lifestyle of cash, drugs, and designer items, performed by a young man who at the time of filming had a Class A line in active operation behind him. The performance is the brand is the line is the income is what is being celebrated in the lyrics. Halfway through the video, Manaka pulls a wad of £20 notes from his pocket. He fans the notes out. He waves them at the camera. The wad is thick. The notes are clearly genuine. The gesture is held long enough for any viewer to count the rough number of bills. The cash is the proof of the boast. The boast is the marketing. The marketing is the music video. The music video is the public-facing storefront for a private criminal operation that, by every legal standard, was meant to stay invisible. Manaka had taken the invisible part of the business and put it on screen. The cannabis is part of the performance. He smokes during the verses. The smoke drifts past the camera. The product on display is Class B. The product being prepared inside the flat behind him on the same day was Class A. The on-camera cannabis is presented as casual. The off-camera crack cocaine and heroin is what was actually paying for the wad of £20 notes in his other hand. The visible drug is the soft one. The hidden drug is the hard one. The economics of the video do not work without the hidden one. The contradiction at the heart of the whole performance is the size of the flat. Designer goods, wads of cash, a drill rapper on the rise, the Tony Montana reference, the lyrics about luxury. All of it is being filmed outside a one-bedroom flat in Gipton. Not a mansion, not a penthouse, not a villa. A small ground-floor property on a residential street that, on any other day, you would walk past without a second glance. The visual gap between the boasts in the song and the address in the background is large enough to drive a van through. The boasts are the aspiration. The address is the reality. You can see why the video worked as a piece of street media. Drill is a genre that values authenticity. Drill listeners want to know that the artist actually lives the life the lyrics describe. A studio shoot, a hired car, a rented mansion, all of those things would have read as fake. The designer's video read as real. The address was real. The cash was real. The flock signal was real. The line behind the camera was real. Every detail that made the video credible to its target audience was the same detail that, 12 months later, made the video credible to a Crown Court judge. Drill rap as a genre has had a complicated history with British law enforcement. Some lyrics have been used as evidence in murder trials. Some videos have been removed from streaming platforms at the request of the Metropolitan Police. Some artists have been given criminal behaviour orders that ban them from performing certain songs. The legal status of drill as evidence is contested. The designer's video was not contested. The designer's video was a man performing in front of his own drug factory, holding a wad of cash made from drug money, throwing the gang signal of the gang that ran the operation. There was nothing to argue about. The footage was the footage. Manaka's mobile phone, when it was eventually seized, contained additional images. Photographs of him posing with cash. Photographs of bundled £20 notes. Photographs that, taken alone, would have raised questions about the source of the money. Taken alongside the Rico marketing message, the bun cases in the kitchen, and the published music video, the photographs sat inside a closed case. Each piece of evidence corroborated every other piece. The phone images confirmed the cash in the music video was not a one-off prop. The cash in the music video confirmed the photographs were not innocent. The marketing message confirmed where the money was coming from. The mindset is the giveaway. A more careful operator would have kept the music separate from the line. Manaka used the same brand for both. Before the camera ever started rolling, before the F signal, before the wad of cash, an operational decision had already been made about which flat to film outside. The next section walks through what officers found when they finally arrived at that flat with a warrant. Section 4. The 2016 raid on the Gipton flat. The arrest happened in August 2016. Manaka was 20 years old. He had been the subject of a long-running police investigation into the supply of Class A drugs across Leeds. The designer's video had been published months earlier. Officers had watched it. Officers had recognised the address. Officers had built a case. The intelligence picture had matured to the point where a raid was authorised. Armed officers were assigned. The flat at 137 Wykebeck Valley Road was the target. The decision was taken to wait for the moment when Manaka was at the property, with stock on the premises, with at least one of his runners present. The moment came in late summer. Manaka was at the flat. The 16-year-old foot soldier was with him. The two of them stepped out of the front door and into a waiting taxi. The taxi began to pull away from the curb. Officers moved. The taxi was stopped before it had cleared the street. Manaka and the youth were taken out of the vehicle. They were searched. The youth was found with a fearsome machete hidden down the front of his trousers. The blade was long enough that it had been classified in court as an offensive weapon in its own right. Manaka was found with mobile phones, cash, and additional drugs on his person. The two arrests opened the door for the warrant on the flat. Armed officers entered 137 Wykebeck Valley Road. The flat was small. One bedroom, a living area, a kitchen. The kitchen was where the work was done. Officers found heroin and crack cocaine packaged into individual wraps. The wraps had been placed into paper bun cases. The cases had been placed onto the work surface. The food blender was on the side. The ice cream scoop was in a drawer. The mixing bowl was on the table. The latex gloves were nearby. Every item required to mix, cut, and portion Class A product was sitting in plain sight. The kitchen had not been hidden. The kitchen had not been disguised. The kitchen was a working kitchen for a working drug operation. The drugs themselves were seized. The total quantity recovered was enough to confirm the line had been running for an extended period before the raid. The product was high enough purity to confirm the supply chain was a serious one. The mobile phones recovered from Manaka's person were taken away for forensic download. Officers expected the phones to be locked. Officers expected the phones to require specialist tools. Officers got the phones open. The phones contained the marketing message to the Rico customer list. The phones contained images of cash. The phones contained call logs that linked Manaka to dozens of customers across Leeds. The phones contained, in effect, the operational record of the entire line. The marketing message read in plain English. Manaka had written, in his own words, that Rico was back and that he would be on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The message had been sent out to a customer list. The list itself was a piece of evidence. The customers on the list were a network of Class A users across Leeds who had been receiving deliveries from Manaka and his runners on demand. The phone forensics tied the line to the flat to the music video to the artist to the man in custody. Every link in the chain ran through the same person. The 16-year-old foot soldier was processed at the police station. He was charged with conspiracy to supply heroin and crack cocaine, and with possession of an offensive weapon. He was 16 years old. He had been carrying a machete down his trousers as he left a one-bedroom flat used to store Class A drugs in an East Leeds suburb. His role at the bottom of the operation was the role most likely to involve direct physical violence. The runners were the ones who met customers. The runners were the ones who carried the product. Runners were the ones who, if the meet went wrong, were expected to defend the line. Leiby, the second-tier figure in the operation, was arrested separately. He was charged with conspiracy to supply heroin and crack cocaine. The case against him relied on the phone evidence, the customer lists, and his connection to Manukah. The three defendants, Manukah, Leiby, and the youth, were all eventually brought before Leeds Crown Court. All three pleaded guilty. The court was told that all three were Congolese nationals. All three faced deportation after the completion of their sentences. The deportation order would matter again 4 years later in the second case. The investigation that led to the raid was part of a wider piece of work being run by the Leeds District Serious Organised Crime Unit. Detective Inspector Jazz Khan headed the team that built the case. The unit had been monitoring Class A supply across Chapeltown, Hare Hills, Gipton, and the surrounding districts for months before the warrant was executed. The team's approach was painstaking. Surveillance, undercover purchases, phone work, and documentary evidence had all been combined into a package that, by the time it reached the Crown Prosecution Service, was strong enough that the defendants pleaded guilty rather than contest the case at trial. The designer's video was part of that package. The cells at the local custody suite held Manukah overnight. He was 20 years old. He had a stage name. He had a music video. He had a customer list. He had a co-defendant in the next cell along. He had a 16-year-old foot soldier somewhere else in the building. He was at the start of a process that would end 6 months later with a 6-year sentence at Leeds Crown Court. The designer's video was already public. The video would still be public on the day of his sentencing. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next section steps back from the operation and into the biography. Francis Street, Chapeltown, the Flock Allegiance. The streets that produced the man who decided to film a music video outside his own drug factory. Section 5. Levite Manukah, Francis Street, Chapeltown. Francis Street is a residential road in Chapeltown, north of Leeds city centre. The street runs through one of the most layered districts in the whole of West Yorkshire. Chapeltown is the area that hosts the Leeds West Indian Carnival every August. It is the area that has produced some of the most celebrated musicians and artists in Yorkshire's modern cultural history. It is also the area that, for decades, has been at the centre of organised crime concerns in the city. The same streets that put on the carnival have, on different days of the year, been the location of shootings, stabbings, and turf disputes between rival drug lines. Francis Street sits inside that complicated geography. Levite Manukah grew up around those streets. The court records from his 2017 sentencing list his address as Francis Street, Chapeltown. He was a Congolese national. His family had connections to the Democratic Republic of Congo. His immigration status was such that, on conviction, deportation became part of the sentence. He was 20 years old when he was sentenced for the first time. He had been operating the Rico line and filming music videos outside the operational flat at the age of 19. The criminal trajectory had started before he was old enough to legally drink in a pub. The Flock allegiance was already in place by the time of the designer's video. The Flock was not a group Manukah had drifted into casually. The F sign at the start of his music video was a public declaration of membership. The Flock was a Leeds-based organised crime gang with a presence in Chapeltown, Gipton and Hare Hills. The gang's reputation by the mid-2000s had grown to the point where Crown Court hearings on unrelated cases were referencing it by name. The Flock was the gang that, in the words of Leeds detectives, had a stranglehold on parts of the community. The Flock was the gang that had been compared, in the local press, to the Chicago crime families of the Prohibition era. That comparison was made during a murder trial. The court was told that the rivalries between Flock members and rival gangsters had spilled into running street battles across Chapeltown. Young men attacking each other in public with fearsome weapons. Shootings at moving cars in rush-hour traffic. Public executions in 2 separate incidents of named Flock members in revenge attacks. The murder of Christopher Lewis. The murder of another Flock member, Gabriel Wilkes, killed in a Chapeltown barbershop by men driven from outside the area to do the job. The streets Manukah grew up on were, by every meaningful measure, dangerous streets to be a young man on the wrong side of the wrong rivalry. The flock's distinguishing feature, the thing that separated it from most other organised crime gangs in West Yorkshire, was the openness. Most gangs hide. Most gangs operate quietly. Most gangs treat secrecy as the basic survival strategy of any criminal enterprise. The flock did the opposite. Members posted videos. Members threw the F sign. Members posed with weapons. Members appeared in music videos performed at the addresses where they were running their lines. Court reports on multiple flock cases used the same phrase, that members openly advertised their involvement in the Class A drugs trade and the use of firearms. The phrase appears in case after case, year after year, defendant after defendant. The advertising was the brand. The brand was the recruitment. Younger men in Chapeltown, Hare Hills and Gipton saw the videos. The videos showed cash. The videos showed designer clothes. The videos showed the F sign. The videos made the gang look like an opportunity rather than a risk. New recruits joined. The recruits became runners. The runners became second-tier dealers. The second-tier dealers became line operators. The line operators eventually got arrested or shot. The cycle ran on its own momentum, fed by exactly the kind of music video Manaka had filmed. You can place Manaka inside that cycle. He was 19 when the designer's video was filmed. He was 20 when he was arrested. He was the kind of figure the gang had spent years recruiting and elevating. He had a stage name, a music video, a customer list, and a 24-hour line. He was, in the gang's own internal logic, a success story. He was also, by any external measure, on a fast track to a long prison sentence. The biographical context matters because the choices Manaka made in 2016 did not come from nowhere. They came from a culture inside the flock that had normalised exactly that kind of behaviour. Filming outside an operational flat was not unique to him. Posing with cash was not unique to him. Wearing the F sign on camera was not unique to him. Other flock members had done the same things in earlier videos. Manaka was operating inside a template. The template was the problem. The template made every operator inside it visible, traceable, and prosecutable from the moment they bought into it. The wider Leeds picture, by 2016, was that detectives had started running operations specifically designed to dismantle that template. Operation Azure Way was the largest of those operations. The team behind Azure Way had been granted 300 search warrants over the life of the operation. The team had arrested 125 people across multiple phases of activity. The team had targeted the flock as one of its priority gangs. The Rico line was inside the target package. Manaka's name was inside the target package. The designer's video was inside the target package. By the time he was arrested in August 2016, the case against him had been building for months. What was carried into court on the day of the sentencing was not just the evidence from the raid, it was the biography, it was the flock allegiance, it was the music video, it was the public-facing brand. The judge knew exactly what kind of operator he was sentencing. The lifestyle Manaka had been performing on camera for months had shaped the courtroom Manaka was about to walk into. The next section is the day in court. The plea, the judge, the sentence, and the words that closed out the first chapter of the case. Section 6. February 2017. 6 years at Leeds Crown Court. Leeds Crown Court is a stone building on Oxford Row in the centre of the city. It handles the most serious criminal cases in West Yorkshire. On the morning of the sentencing hearing in February 2017, 3 defendants were brought into the dock. The first was Levit Manaka, 20 years old, of Francis Street, Chapeltown. The second was a man named Labby, the second-tier operator on the Rico line. The third was a 16-year-old male who could not be named for legal reasons. All 3 had pleaded guilty in earlier hearings to conspiracy to supply heroin and crack cocaine. The youth had also pleaded guilty to possession of an offensive weapon, the machete recovered from his trousers at the time of the arrest. The presiding judge was Tom Bayliss QC. The prosecution opened the facts of the case. The court heard about the Rico line. The court heard about the 24-hour customer service. The court heard about the marketing messages sent to the customer list. The court heard about the bun cases on the kitchen counter at 137 Wykebeck Valley Road. The court heard about the food blender the ice cream scoop, the mixing bowl, the latex gloves. The court heard about the heroin and crack cocaine recovered from the property. The court heard about the machete down the trousers of the 16-year-old. The court was shown the designer's music video. The video was the centerpiece of the prosecution's presentation of the case. The court was shown Manica standing in front of the operational flat. The court was shown the F sign at the start of the track. The court was shown the wad of £20 notes. The court was shown the cannabis being smoked. The court was shown the lyrics on screen. The video did the work that, in most drug cases, requires hours of expert witness testimony to establish. In this case, the defendant had filmed himself committing the offence. The footage spoke for itself. Judge Bayliss QC addressed Manica directly. The judge told him that the evidence demonstrated he was a highly sophisticated drugs trafficker with a large supply network. The judge told him that he had been able to arrange quick delivery of his wares to his customers. The judge told him that he had been in control of the operation. The language was the language of a Crown Court judge confronted with a serious organised criminal, not a youthful first offender. The sentence reflected the assessment. Manica was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Leiby was sentenced to 3 years and 9 months. The court found that he had operated as Manica's second on the Rico line. The court found that he had handled day-to-day mechanics, while Manica handled the brand and the customer base. The sentence reflected a significant role in the conspiracy. Leiby was led from the dock to begin his sentence. The third defendant, the 16-year-old, was given 42 months. The youth was a child by every legal standard. The 42-month sentence reflected both the conspiracy charge and the offensive weapon charge. The blade in his trousers had added to the time. The court was clear that the youth had been a foot soldier in an operation directed from above. Detective Inspector Jazz Khan of the Leeds District Serious Organised Crime Unit made a statement after the hearing. The unit had built the case over months. The unit had relied on a combination of surveillance, undercover purchases, phone forensics, and documentary evidence. The detective inspector said the case demonstrated the unit's commitment to dismantling Class A supply networks across the city. The detective inspector said the operation Manica had been running was making a very significant contribution to the supply of Class A drugs that did enormous damage both to individuals who took them and to the communities where they fueled crime and antisocial behaviour. The statement was the kind of statement that follows almost every major drug sentencing in Leeds. The deportation order sat alongside the prison sentence. All 3 defendants were Congolese nationals. All 3 faced removal from the United Kingdom on the completion of their sentences. The order was a standard consequence of the immigration status of the defendants and the seriousness of the offences. Manica, on the day of his sentencing, was facing 6 years in custody, followed by deportation to the Democratic Republic of Congo. The combined effect was that, in theory, his time as a Leeds-based Class A operator was over. In theory. The sentencing made the local papers. The Yorkshire Evening Post ran the case under the headline that Manica was a rap artist, jailed over a Leeds drug factory. The story laid out the connection between Lev's Montana and the Rico line. The story showed stills from the designer's video. The story named the flock. The case became one of the early examples in the Leeds press of a drill rapper being prosecuted partly on the strength of his own music video. The designer's video continued to circulate online. The video was now both a piece of public evidence and a piece of street media. The first chapter closed with Manica being taken down to the cells. He was 20 years old. He had a 6-year sentence. He had a deportation order. He had, by any reasonable measure, every reason to walk away from the life that had put him there. The designer's video had been used against him in the highest criminal court in West Yorkshire. The lyrics about cash and designer goods had landed him in a prison cell. The performance he had filmed in front of his own drug factory had, in the most direct possible way, become the evidence that locked him up. The second chapter started the moment he was released. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next section picks up at the prison gate, the release on licence, the move to Roundhay Road in Hare Hills, and the decision that within months put Manica back at the centre of a new operation. Section 7. Released on licence and back on the roads. Prison release on licence is a structured process. A prisoner serving a 6-year sentence does not, in most cases, serve the full 6 years inside the walls. The standard arrangement is that the prisoner serves a portion of the sentence in custody and the remainder in the community on licence. The licence period comes with conditions. The prisoner has to attend probation appointments. The prisoner has to live at an approved address. The prisoner has to stay away from named associates. The prisoner has to avoid further offending. A breach of any of those conditions can result in the prisoner being recalled to custody to serve the remainder of the sentence inside the walls. The licence is, in effect, a continuation of the sentence by other means. Levit Manica was released from prison on licence at some point before February 2020. The exact date of his release has not been publicly recorded. What is recorded is the address he gave for his post-release life. He moved to Roundhay Road in Hare Hills. Roundhay Road is one of the main arterial routes running north out of Leeds city centre. Hare Hills sits just east of Chapeltown. The two districts share borders, share streets, and share a long history of overlapping organised crime activity. The move from Francis Street to Roundhay Road was a move of about a mile. It was a change of address. It was not a change of environment. Probation appointments were attended. The court records confirm that Manica continued to report to the probation service throughout the period after his release. He kept the appointments. He gave the right answers. He maintained, on the surface, every appearance of a man complying with the terms of his licence. The probation service was satisfied with his attendance. The licence conditions were, on paper, being met. The man inside the system looked like a success story for rehabilitation. The man outside the system was building a new operation. By February 2020, less than 3 years after his original sentencing, Manica had set up a fresh county lines drug supply network. The new operation ran between Leeds and Humberside. The product was the same as before: heroin and crack cocaine. The structure was different. The Rico line had been a Leeds-only operation, run out of a single flat in Gipton, with deliveries inside the city. The new operation was a county lines model, running product out of West Yorkshire and into a different police force area entirely. Bridlington and the wider Humberside region were the destination market. County lines is the term used to describe the model where a drug operation in one part of the country sends product, runners, and instructions into a different part of the country. The line itself is a phone number. Customers in the destination area dial the number. Runners travel from the home base to the destination with stock. Cash travels back. The home base never has to expose its operators directly to the destination market. The runners take the physical risk. The line operator stays in the home city, holds the phone, takes the orders, and directs the deliveries by message. Manica was the line operator. The home base was Leeds. The destination market was Humberside. The runners were not adults. The runners were children. The 4 boys identified by police as having been controlled by Manica between February and May 2020 were aged from 14 years old upwards. 3 of them had been reported missing by their parents. The boys were from the Leeds and Bradford area. They were being moved across to Humberside, sometimes for days at a time, to deliver Class A drugs to customers in Bridlington and surrounding towns. They were carrying the product. They were holding the cash. They were taking the physical risk that, in the original Rico operation, the 16-year-old with the machete had been taking. The use of children in county lines operations is one of the most heavily documented patterns in modern UK drugs policing. Criminal exploitation of children, the formal term used in safeguarding work, refers to the way organised crime groups recruit children with promises of money, friendship, and status, and then control them through a combination of threats, violence, and, in some cases, sexual abuse. Once a child is inside the operation, the child often feels unable to leave. The exploitation is the operating model. The runners are not employees. The runners are children being moved across county lines by adults who have profited from their fear. The Levs Montana brand was still active during this period. The Snapchat account was still being used. Photographs of Monaco holding cash were taken during the period when the new operation was in full swing. The same advertising mindset that had produced the designer's video in 2016 was producing fresh content in 2020. Cash photographs, lifestyle posts. The same self-promotion that had been used as evidence at his first sentencing was now being used to build a fresh evidence file for what would become his second. The mindset is the giveaway. A man who had been jailed once, partly on the strength of his own music video, was continuing to post images of cash made from Class A drug supply on a public social media platform. The lessons of the first conviction had not been internalized. The brand had survived the prison sentence. The performance had outlasted the punishment. The same template that had failed the first time was being used the second time. The only thing that had changed was the destination market. By May 2020, the West Yorkshire Police Leeds Precision Team had assembled enough intelligence to move on the new operation. The team had been working the case for months. The team knew the line was running. The team knew the runners were children. The team knew the directing phone was being held by an adult based in Leeds. The team did not yet have the adult identified by name. That identification would come at the moment of arrest. The next section steps onto the streets of Bridlington. 4 boys, a directing phone, and the May 2020 arrest that turned the file into a charge. Section 8. Bridlington, 4 boys, and the May 2020 arrest. Bridlington is a seaside town on the East Yorkshire coast. The town sits inside the Humberside Police Force area. The high street runs down towards the harbour. The promenade looks out over the North Sea. The population is around 35,000 people. The economy is built on tourism, fishing, and the standard mix of small businesses that you find in any English coastal town. Bridlington is not the kind of place that, on first impression, looks like a county lines drug market. It is exactly the kind of place where county lines drug markets thrive. The pattern is consistent across the United Kingdom. Coastal towns and small market towns, often with high levels of deprivation and limited local policing resources, become destination markets for Class A drug operations run out of larger cities. The runners arrive with stock. The line phone advertises to a customer base built up over months or years of repeat trade. The cash flows back to the home base. The local market keeps absorbing the product because the demand is there. Bridlington had been receiving deliveries from Monaco's Leeds-based operation for months by the time the arrests started. The 4 boys identified by police as Monaco's runners were aged from 14 upwards. 3 of them had been reported missing by parents in the Leeds and Bradford area. The 4th had been missing in a less formal sense. They had all travelled from West Yorkshire to Humberside. They had all been carrying Class A product. They had all been carrying cash. The arrests took place across Bridlington and other parts of Humberside between February and May 2020. The boys were stopped. The boys were searched. The boys were found in possession of varying amounts of crack cocaine, heroin, and cash. Each arrest produced an evidential thread that, when combined, pointed back towards a single directing phone in Leeds. The directing phone was the key. County Lines operations leave a phone trail. The line operator sends messages to customers. The line operator sends messages to runners. The line operator receives confirmation of deliveries. The line operator receives reports on stock levels. Every part of the operation moves through the same handset. When investigators recover one of the runners' phones, they get a partial picture. When they recover several runners' phones, the picture starts to converge on the same source number. The source number was the number Monaco was holding. In May 2020, the Leeds Precision Team moved on Monaco directly. He was arrested at his Roundhay Road address. He was found in possession of a mobile phone. The phone was the directing phone. The phone was linked to the number that had been issuing instructions to the 4 boys in Humberside. The phone had been used to send batch messages to the customer list in Bridlington. The phone had been used to monitor stock movements. The phone had been used to confirm cash collections. Every operational thread of the new line ran through that single device. The arrest closed the loop. The phone forensics produced more than just the line evidence. The phone contained images of Monarca holding cash. The cash had been made from the county lines operation. The images had been taken during the period the line was active. The images were the same kind of images that had appeared in the designer's video 4 years earlier. Cash on display. Bundled £20 notes. The performer as evidence pattern that had defined the first case was reproducing itself, in private photographs this time rather than published music videos, but with the same self-incriminating function. The phone was a complete record of an operation that should never have been recorded at all. The 4 boys were taken into safeguarding processes. The exploitation of children by county lines operations is, in modern UK policing, treated as a child protection issue as well as a criminal one. The boys were not the targets of the prosecution, they were the victims of it. The investigation that followed treated their movements, their messages, and their conditions of work as evidence against the man who had been directing them. The fact that 3 of them had been reported missing by parents was used in court as part of the aggravating context. Monarca was charged with conspiracy to supply Class A drugs and other drugs offences. The charges reflected the scale of the operation. The Leeds precision team had built a package that, by the time it was put before the Crown Prosecution Service, was strong enough to support a guilty plea rather than a contested trial. The evidence chain was clean. The phone tied him to the line. The line tied him to the runners. The runners tied him to the destination market. The cash images tied him to the proceeds. Every link was secured. Detective Inspector Kevin Daly headed the Leeds precision team. The team's brief was the investigation of serious and organised crime in the Leeds district. The team had built the case over the months when Monarca had been moving between probation appointments and directing a new line. The contrast was the centre of the case. A man complying on paper. A man offending in practice. A man who had walked out of prison on licence less than 3 years earlier and immediately set up a fresh Class A operation, using children younger than the youth who had been with him at the time of the original raid. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The next section walks through the work of the Leeds precision team, the phone forensics, the recovered cash images, and the build to charge that turned the May 2020 arrest into a December 2021 sentencing. Section 9. The Leeds Precision Team Investigation. The Leeds Precision Team is the unit inside West Yorkshire Police, tasked with the investigation of serious and organised crime across the Leeds district. The team's work is structured around long-running intelligence packages rather than rapid response. Officers build cases over months. Officers map networks. Officers identify the directing minds behind the lines and work upwards from the runners to the operators to the bosses. The team's brief is to dismantle organised crime groups rather than to make individual arrests. Monarca case fitted that brief precisely. The arrest in May 2020 was the visible part of a piece of investigative work that had been going on quietly for months before it. The intelligence picture had developed in stages. The first stage was the pattern of arrests in Humberside, boys from the Leeds and Bradford area being stopped in Bridlington with Class A product. The pattern was consistent enough that it was clearly the work of a single line, rather than a series of unrelated incidents. The second stage was the missing persons reports filed by parents in West Yorkshire. The reports gave names, ages, and last known movements. The third stage was the cross-referencing of those reports against the arrest records in Humberside. The matches confirmed that the same children were being moved repeatedly between the 2 areas. The fourth stage was the identification of the directing phone. Phone forensics is the spine of every modern county lines investigation. The runner's phones are the entry point. When a runner is arrested, the phone is taken away for download. The download produces call logs, message threads, contact lists, and image files. The investigator looks for the number that has been issuing instructions. That number is the directing phone. Once the directing phone is identified, the investigator looks for any device, anywhere in the country, that has been holding that number. The handset is the target. The person holding the handset is the suspect. In the Manaka case, the directing phone was identified through the runner's devices. The number issuing instructions was consistent across multiple arrests. The number had been active for months. The number was being held by a device in West Yorkshire. The triangulation of cell site data placed the device in the Roundhay Road area of Hare Hills. The address Manaka had given as his post-release residence was inside that cell site cluster. The intelligence package narrowed onto him by name. The team waited for the moment when the directing phone was on his person. That moment came in May 2020. The arrest produced the handset. The handset produced the evidence. The download confirmed every prediction the intelligence package had been making. The number issuing instructions to the runners was the number on the device in Manaka's possession. The customer messages sent to the Bridlington market had been sent from the same device. The stock checks, the cash confirmations, the operational chatter, all of it sat on the phone in Manaka's hand at the moment of arrest. The forensic case was effectively closed by the device itself. The image files added the second layer. The phone contained photographs of Manaka holding cash. The bundles of notes were of a size and frequency that, taken alongside the operational messages on the same device, were impossible to explain through legitimate income. The images had been taken during the period the line was running. The cash in the images correlated with the volumes the line had been turning over. The photographs were not the centerpiece of the case in the way the designer's video had been the centerpiece of the first case. The photographs were corroborating material. The line evidence was strong enough on its own. The Levs Montana social media output, still active during this period, gave the investigation an additional layer of context. The drill rap brand had not been retired during the prison sentence. The brand had been maintained. The same self-promotional habits that had produced the designer's video in 2016 were producing fresh content in 2020. Detectives reviewing the social media accounts could see the continuity. The artist on stage and the dealer holding the directing phone were the same man. The performance had not been a one-off. The performance was the operating mode. The four boys were processed through safeguarding rather than prosecution. The county line safeguarding model treats children controlled by an adult-led drugs operation as victims of criminal exploitation. The boys had been recovered alive. The boys had been returned to their families or placed into appropriate care. The boys had been interviewed about their conditions of work. The accounts they gave fed into the prosecution case against Manaka. The age of the youngest, 14, sat as one of the central aggravating features of the file the Crown Prosecution Service eventually received. The build to charge took time. Phone forensics, cell site analysis, witness interviews, missing persons reports, and the safeguarding work with the children all had to be drawn together into a coherent prosecution package. The team built the package over the months following the May 2020 arrest. The Crown Prosecution Service reviewed the file, charges were laid. Manaka was charged with conspiracy to supply Class A drugs and other drugs offences. The charging decision reflected the strength of the evidence and the seriousness of the conduct. There was no realistic defence available to him. The phone was his. The number was his. The runners were his. The cash images were his. The brand was his. Detective Inspector Kevin Daly, who headed the Leeds precision team, later described the case as a clear example of why the unit existed. The team's painstaking and complex detective work had tied Manaka directly to the conspiracy. The scale of the exploitation, with children as young as 14 being moved across county lines to deliver Class A drugs, sat at the centre of the file. The investigation had taken months. The case file ran to hundreds of pages. The result of all of it was that by late 2021, Manaka was facing a second sentencing hearing at Leeds Crown Court for offences almost identical to the ones that had put him behind bars the first time. The case reached court in December 2021. The dock was familiar. The judge's bench was familiar. The defendant was the same man, 4 years older, with one previous conviction for the same kind of offence sitting on his record. The designer's video had not played a role in the second prosecution. The designer's video did not need to. The new evidence file was complete on its own. The next section is the second sentencing. 7 years, the aggravating features, the deportation order, and the closing reflection on what both convictions, 4 years apart, prove about the same man and the same self-advertising mindset that brought him down twice. Section 10, December 2021, 7 years and the pattern. Both cases prove. Leeds Crown Court in December 2021 saw the return of a defendant it had sentenced 4 years earlier. Levit Monarca was 25 years old. He had served the custodial portion of his original 6-year sentence. He had been released on licence. He had moved from Francis Street in Chapeltown to Roundhay Road in Hare Hills. He had attended his probation appointments. He had, on the surface, complied with the conditions of his licence. Behind that surface, he had set up a new county lines operation, recruited 4 children to work as runners, and run a Class A supply chain between Leeds and the Humberside coast for the better part of 3 months. The court had the entire file in front of it. Monarca had pleaded guilty. The evidence package the Leeds precision team had built was strong enough that a contested trial was not realistic. He had pleaded guilty to conspiracy to supply Class A drugs and to the other drugs offences brought against him. The hearing in December 2021 was a sentencing hearing rather than a trial. The judge had to determine the appropriate term. The factors before the court were the conspiracy itself, the role of the directing operator, the use of children as runners, the previous conviction for almost identical offences, and the fact that the new offending had taken place while Monarca was on licence from the original sentence. Each of those factors was an aggravating feature. The previous conviction confirmed that this was not a first offence, and not a youthful misjudgment. The licence status confirmed that Monarca had been on notice from the criminal justice system that further offending would result in significant additional time. The use of children, with the youngest aged 14, sat at the centre of the moral weight of the case. The directing role confirmed that he had been the controlling mind behind the operation, rather than a peripheral participant. The combination of features moved the sentence well beyond what the conspiracy charge alone would have produced. The court sentenced Monarca to 7 years in prison. The term was a year longer than his original sentence, despite the volume of the new operation being lower than the volume of the Rico line. The increase reflected the aggravating features rather than the scale. The judge did not need to spell out the calculation. The previous conviction, the licence breach, and the exploitation of children added time onto every category of the offending. 7-year term was a public statement that the criminal justice system had taken full account of who he was as well as what he had done. The deportation order from the original case remained in force. Monarca was due to be removed to the Democratic Republic of Congo on the completion of his second sentence. The combined effect was that by the time he finished serving his time and the deportation was executed, he would be in his early 30s, with 2 Class A conspiracy convictions on his record, and no legal right to return to the United Kingdom. The Leeds chapter of his life would be closed by force of immigration law as well as by the prison sentence. Detective Inspector Kevin Daly made the closing statement for the Leeds precision team. The detective inspector said that the case demonstrated the unit's commitment to targeting those who sought to exploit vulnerable young people through the drugs trade. The detective inspector said that the world of drug dealing was a dangerous one, and that the evidence had shown that the young people Monarca was controlling had been subject to serious violence and harm. The detective inspector said that it had taken painstaking and complex detective work to tie Monarca directly to the conspiracy, and that he had been left with no option but to admit his involvement when faced with the evidence at court. The statement closed the case file from the police side. Step back from the individuals and look at the pattern. The same man, twice, in the same court, on essentially the same charge, separated by 4 years. The first time, the centrepiece evidence was a music video Monarca had filmed himself. The second time, the centrepiece evidence was a phone Manaka had been holding when officers arrived at his door. In both cases, the man who had been most useful to the prosecution was the defendant. The Rico line, the designer's video, the F sign at the start of the track, the wad of cash in front of the camera, the photographs of bundled notes on the seized handset, the directing number sending instructions to children in Humberside. Every single piece of evidence that put Manaka behind bars across both cases had been generated by Manaka. The investigators had collected. The defendant had produced. The mindset is the giveaway. The first conviction was the kind of mistake a young man might make once and learn from. The second conviction was the kind of mistake a man makes when the lesson has not been internalized. The Lev's Montana brand had outlasted the original prison sentence. The Snapchat habit had outlasted the deportation order. The taste for cash photographs had outlasted the 4 years inside the walls. The same operating template that had failed the first time had failed the second time, in almost identical fashion, with the only meaningful difference being that the runners in the second operation were even younger than the foot soldier in the first. The case is a study in self-promotion as a counter-survival strategy in organised crime. The Flock template, the open advertising of involvement in the Class A drugs trade and the use of firearms, had worked at the level of recruitment and street reputation. The template had failed completely at the level of evidential exposure. Every Flock member who appeared in a video, threw the F sign, posed with cash, or branded a dealer line with a stage name, produced fresh material for the file that would eventually convict them. The strange genius of the whole thing is that the same behaviours that built the gang were the behaviours that dismantled it, member by member, conviction by conviction, across the second half of the 2000s and into the 2020s. Levit Manaka is one figure inside that pattern. The designer's video is one piece of evidence inside that pattern. The Rico line, the Bridlington runners, the Roundhay Road arrest, and the 7-year sentence at Leeds Crown Court are all chapters in a story that the gang itself wrote on camera and on social media. The investigators read the story back to the court read the story back to the defendant. The defendant, twice, was the author of his own conviction. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.